Welcome to another deep dive here at WeWire. As you know, each week we put together the Stay Wired Weekly Recap, bringing you the latest on market movers and active stocks. But as we were compiling our most recent report, a really fascinating question sort of jumped out.
That's right. Yeah, in the latest Stay Wired Weekly Recap, we posed this. Well, it seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can a continent that's still importing a lot of basic goods realistically aim to manufacture advanced tech like electric vehicles?
Like Tesla rivals, even.
Exactly. Potentially even rivaling a giant like Tesla. It's a huge leap to consider.
It truly is. You look at Africa, and the reality is many countries still rely heavily on imports for just everyday things. I mean, we use the toothpick example.
Toothpick.
And then you think about making cutting-edge EVs. It almost feels like, two different worlds.
Totally. So our mission, really, in this deep dive is to unpack this. We want to look at the state of manufacturing in Africa right now, identify the resources the continent actually has, and then really dig into what it takes, the huge requirements for advanced EV manufacturing, and ultimately try to get a clearer picture of, well, how feasible is this?
Welcome to your weekly analysis of key global trends and insights on macroeconomics, geopolitical shifts, currency movements, finance, trade, and top investment highlights.
With John
and Wendy.
Okay, so let's start with what we at WeWire have been calling the import paradox. As our Stay Wired recap detailed, this reliance on imported basics is pretty significant.
It really is. And the toothpick example, it's stark.
Right.
We highlighted in the recap, Nigeria, a major economy, spent around $60,000 just importing toothpicks back in 2018.
$60,000 on toothpicks.
Yeah, and zooming out, between 2014 and 2015, Nigeria's total spend on basic imports, things like toothpicks, fish, milk, hit a massive $7.4 billion. That figure really underlines the issue.
And it's not just Nigeria, right? Our Stay Wired research for the recap showed Ghana, too. In 2023, their total imports were, $13.7 billion?
$13.7 billion, yeah. And that included toothpicks as well. It paints a very clear picture of this dependence.
So the fundamental question we raise in the Stay Wired recap is, if making even basic stuff is a struggle, how can we seriously talk about the complexities of advanced manufacturing like EVs? What's actually holding back self-sufficiency in those basic areas?
That's the crucial point. And as we explored in the Stay Wired Weekly Recap, Africa's manufacturing sector overall is, pretty underdeveloped. The entire continent accounted for less than 2% of global manufacturing output as of 2022. Less than 2%. That's surprisingly small.
It really is. And this isn't something new, is it? Our research for the recap suggested it's a longer trend.
Unfortunately, yeah. The Journal of African Economies pointed to this worrying decline in manufacturing's contribution to GDP, the MVA, manufacturing value added. It dropped from about 16% in 1980 to under 10% by 2016. That shows stagnation, even maybe some early deindustrialization.
So, based on our work for the Stay Wired recap, what are the big hurdles? What's hindering manufacturing growth?
Well, we'd identified several key things. High business costs are a big one. Then you've got political and regulatory instability that always makes investors nervous.
Sure.
And a major bottleneck is infrastructure, poor infrastructure. The Charter Cities Institute, for example, notes shipping costs within Africa can inflate prices by a huge 75%.
75%.
Yeah. And over half the roads are unpaved. So just moving goods around is incredibly difficult and expensive.
And as we often discuss in the Stay Wired recap, that reliance on just exporting natural resources can sometimes overshadow building up manufacturing.
Precisely. You get locked into volatile commodity prices.
Yeah.
But, in our Stay Wired reporting, we also highlighted something with huge potential. The African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA.
Right, the AFCTA.
The hope is that creating this single market, potentially worth around $3 trillion, could really kickstart industrial growth by making trade within Africa easier.
That's a massive potential market. Are there any countries leading the way a bit in manufacturing now?
Well, yeah, countries like South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, they generally have the most developed manufacturing sectors.
Right.
But as our Stay Wired analysis showed, even their output is pretty small compared to the global big hitters.
Okay, so that's the current picture. Now let's shift focus. What does it actually take to make something like a Tesla? What's a benchmark we're even talking about here?
Right, this is where it gets really interesting. And as we detailed in the Stay Wired recap, making a Tesla needs this combination of really advanced tech, incredibly precise engineering, and a super efficient lean supply chain.
Tell us about this unboxed process from Tesla we mentioned in the recap. It sounds like a total game changer.
It really is. It's like they completely rethought how you build a car. This unboxed process reportedly cut production costs by a massive 50%.
50%.
50%. And it reduced the factory footprint by 40%. And get the assembly time for a Model 3. Around 90 minutes, they turn out a car roughly every 44 seconds.
Wow. Every 44 seconds. How do they even do that? That speed, those cost savings.
Well, there are a few key things. They use these huge single-piece castings, giga castings, for big parts of the car body. That cuts down the number of parts dramatically.
Ah.
But they also have structural battery packs where the battery isn't just power, it's actually part of the car's structure.
Clever.
And then there are the highly automated assembly lines. Loads of robots doing incredibly precise work, welding, assembling. Evanix highlighted this robotic precision. Think micrometer-level accuracy.
It sounds almost sci-fi, and I remember from our Stay Wired research, their gigafactories are these huge, integrated places.
Absolutely. They do everything: battery production, vehicle assembly, making key components all under one massive roof. That vertical integration gives them huge control over costs and keeps things flowing smoothly. And of course, none of it works without reliable access to critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel for the batteries.
So when we compare the Tesla standard to what we see in Africa now, what's the big takeaway from our Stay Wired analysis?
The recap made it pretty clear. The gap is significant. It's a huge gap in technology, in infrastructure, particularly reliable energy.
Yeah, energy reliability is key.
Absolutely. And you need a highly skilled workforce to run and maintain all these complex systems. African manufacturers would need to make enormous leaps.
It sounds like a monumental task. But, as we also noted in the Stay Wired recap, Africa does have some aces up its sleeve, right? Let's talk about those critical minerals.
Yes, this is really pivotal. As we often discuss in these Stay Wired deep dives, Africa holds vast reserves of exactly the minerals needed for EV batteries. This gives the continent a potentially crucial role in the whole global EV supply chain.
Can you give some examples? Which minerals, which countries?
Sure. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is the big one for cobalt, produces over 70% of the world's supply.
70%.
Yeah, dominant. Then you have South Africa and Zambia, major players in manganese and copper, both vital for batteries. And the African Development Bank reckons the continent has several million tons of lithium reserves and potentially more to be found.
That's a serious amount of essential stuff. You'd think that gives Africa a strong hand to play.
It certainly could. But, as we also covered in the Stay Wired recap, the mining sector itself has major challenges. Things like environmental damage, serious human rights concerns in some places.
Right, the conditions.
And very low wages.
Yeah.
The Guardian reported workers in some DRC mines earning as little as $3.50 a day.
$3.50. Wow, those are critical issues. And the recap also mentioned where the value actually gets added, right? It's not always in Africa.
Exactly. Right now, China dominates the refining and processing of these minerals. So Africa might dig this stuff up, but a lot of the higher value work, the tech development, the better paying jobs that happens elsewhere, the continent isn't capturing the full benefit yet.
We did see some moves to try and change that, though, didn't we, in the recap?
Yes, there are efforts. The Stay Wired recap mentioned that agreement between the U.S., the DRC, and Zambia. The idea is to build up regional battery production capacity within Africa. But, like we said, these big initiatives, they tend to take time. Progress can be slow.
So, the raw materials are there, but there's a long road ahead for ethical sourcing and actually capturing the economic benefits locally through processing. Now, despite all these challenges, the Stay Wired recap did point to some early, maybe small scale, but actual EV manufacturing happening on the continent.
That's right. Yeah, while building a Tesla rival seems distant, we are seeing some interesting first steps, especially with 2- and 3-wheelers, electric motorbikes, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Those seem maybe more immediately practical given the current infrastructure and economics in many places.
Can you give us an example or two? What's happening on the ground?
Well, the Stay Wired recap featured a startup called Ampersand in Rwanda. They're making electric motorbikes for taxi riders.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it cuts the driver's fuel costs way down, creates local jobs. African business reported on them. And then in South Africa, you have bigger players like Ford investing, what was it, $281 million?
That sounds right.
Yeah, according to Mordor Intelligence. That's for hybrid vehicle production, which is a step towards electrification.
So the initial focus seems to be on solving local transport needs, building up that local know-how bit by bit.
Exactly. Trying to reduce import dependence, develop some domestic capability. But, our Stay Wired analysis also flagged the ongoing hurdles. Production costs are still quite high. charging infrastructure is patchy at best across most of the continent.
Yeah, where do you charge it?
Right. And you still need clearer, more supportive government policies to really encourage the sector.
But there's hope that something like the FCFTA could help scale these efforts up.
Absolutely. The idea is FCFTA can make it easier to trade EV components regionally, build those supply chains within Africa. And those international partnerships we mentioned, like the U.S.-led battery initiative, they offer a potential way to eventually scale up to making larger vehicles.
It was encouraging that our Stay Wired research found that as of this year, 2025, there are apparently EV manufacturing or assembly plants either running or planned in 21 African countries.
Yeah, according to Climate and Capital Media.
Though, as we also pointed out, the actual output is still tiny compared to the global giants.
Correct. The scale is limited now, but the direction is towards growth.
Okay, so pulling all this together, what's the path forward look like? How does Africa realistically bridge this huge gap from importing toothpicks to maybe eventually making advanced EVs that could compete with Tesla?
Well, our conclusion in the statewide recap was basically, it's tough, no doubt about it, but it's not impossible. That mineral wealth is a massive strategic advantage you just can't ignore.
But it's clearly got to be more than just digging it up and shipping it out.
Absolutely not. The crucial step is moving beyond just exporting raw materials. It's about developing local processing, local manufacturing. That's where the real value gets added, where the better jobs are created within Africa.
And what about the people side, the skills?
Totally critical. The recap stressed the urgent need for big, sustained investment in STEM education science, tech, engineering, maths. You need to build that skilled workforce. The numbers now really show the challenge. Africa produces maybe 35,000 engineers a year. China, around 1.2 million.
1.2 million versus 35,000. That's a staggering difference. It just highlights the scale of investment needed. And of course, you can't do advanced manufacturing without the basics. The infrastructure.
Precisely. Reliable, affordable energy, efficient transport networks. These are absolute must-haves. You can't run energy-hungry factories with unreliable power, and you can't move cars around efficiently without decent roads and ports.
And good governance, regional cooperation that has to play a role too, right?
Absolutely essential. You need clear, consistent, long-term policies that make investors feel confident. And working together regionally through the FCFTA helps create that bigger, more integrated market, making larger-scale industry more viable than it might be for just one country alone.
So the key takeaway from our Staywire deep dive seems to be, okay, Africa isn't about to become a major Tesla competitor tomorrow.
Not immediately, no.
But the building blocks, the potential, it's there. It's a long game, needs a strategic, multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. While they're far from rivaling Tesla right now, you've got this young, booming population predicted to hit 2.5 billion by 2050. And growing demand for vehicles, including EVs, that's strong foundation. The World Economic Forum even floated the idea that with the right strategic reforms, Africa could potentially sort of leapfrog into advanced manufacturing by maybe 2040.
Fascinating insights, really brings it all together. Now, as part of our weekly Stay Wired recap, we always give you that broader market snapshot. Let's just quickly touch on some of the key global and African market movers we flagged this week.
Sure. Globally, we saw gold ticking up a bit, U.S. jobless claims holding steady. Alibaba missed its forecast, though. U.S. business inventories were pretty flat. Walmart warned about tariffs potentially pushing up prices. U.S. home builder confidence took a dip, and oil prices slid on hints of a possible Iran deal. Also noted the U.S.-UAE tech agreement being finalized, CoreWeave's big deal with OpenAI, Russia's oil and gas revenues falling.
Right.
And Trump asking Apple not to shift iPhone production to India, while German stocks hit a new record high. Lots going on.
Definitely. And what about movements within African markets from the Stay Wired recap?
Okay, in Africa, the South African rand was strong, near a 5-month high. Trump's former Africa advisor was talking peace plans in Rwanda and Congo. Malawi's IMF program ended early. Prime Group is making significant growth investments across Africa. Ethiopia signed some minerals and energy deals with China. South Africa called for a balanced energy transition. Total Energies and BW Energy are nearing decisions on their Namibia projects. And the UK sees growing business opportunities in Nigeria.
Okay. And a quick glance at the FX corner from our Stay Wired weekly recap.
Yeah, sure. The Ghanaian cedi performed really well, big appreciation. Kenyan shilling also gained moderately. The Nigerian naira slipped a bit, though. South African rand, as mentioned, was strong. West African CFA franc saw a slight dip. And globally, we track the usuals: GBP USD, KD USD, JPY USD, and USD CNY.
And finally, the commodities corner from the Stay Wired report.
Brent crude oil ended the week up slightly. Gold prices were down for the week, but physical demand in Asia actually picked up a bit.
Right. And for listeners interested in specific stocks, we always include the most active ones. This week's list in the Stay Wired recap had NVIDIA, Lucid Group, D-Wave Quantum, Tesla, Palantir Technologies, Apple, and Ford. And just the usual reminder, this is purely informational, definitely not investment advice.
So yeah, to wrap up our deep dive, it's clear from our Stay Wired research that, look, the journey from importing basics to making advanced EVs is a huge challenge for Africa. But that mineral wealth is a massive asset.
A key starting point.
Definitely. The early steps in EV manufacturing are positive signs. And if the focus stays on skills, infrastructure, the right policies, then the ambition of playing a much bigger role in the global auto industry, well, it's a potential long-term reality.
It really highlights both how big the task is, but also the exciting potential down the road. So here's a final thought to leave you with. When you consider Africa's huge young population and all that resource wealth, what other massive industrial or tech leaps, things that seem almost insurmountable now, might the continent actually achieve in the next few decades? It really makes you think about Africa's future role in the world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Stay Wired Weekly Recap was produced by WeWire,
a B2B company, bridging the banking gap between emerging markets and the world.
Tune in same time next week for the Stay Wired Weekly Recap.